Hi, folks. Welcome back. Okay, so today we're going to shift gears just a little bit. We've been talking about the physical characteristics of Neanderthals. Well, they are our closest relatives that we know of that ever existed. There may be some more that we find later on, but right now, Neanderthals are it. In fact, we know that we interbred with Neanderthals, therefore, technically, we're the same species. Today we're going to be able to dive into something new, something that we haven't really been able to get that deep into, and that is the culture of Neanderthals, what they were doing, and even more so, because it's so like what we do, it's very human. The area that we're going to talk about in order to illustrate these things is this area here. This is called the Levant region. It is what we would call these days the Middle East. We're looking at areas of Iraq, Israel, Syria to a lesser degree, but really we're going to concentrate in our talk today about a particular cave found in northern Iraq. Before we do that, I want to mention just a little bit about what was going on during the end of the Pleistocene in this area. As I alluded to before in our last lecture, this area of the world, especially the southern Levant region, that is in the areas of Israel, we're starting to see almost a timeshare where anatomically modern humans move in when the warm kind of period is vast and the ice glaciers start to recede north. We see that the anatomically modern humans move north. And then when it gets colder again, when there's a cold snap for several years, then those anatomically modern humans will move south again, and the Neanderthals tended to move south. This became a hotbed of the area where we started looking for crossovers, these admixture between the anatomically modern human population and the Neanderthal population. Sure enough, we found it. But before that, I'm going to talk about some of the other surprising things that we found in those areas. We're going to focus on Shanidar Cave. That is way up in northern Iraq, right along the mountain region. As we zoom in, here is the cave itself. It is a massive cave. If you look closely, you can see this little person standing here. This is the woman who is partially responsible for discovering the Neanderthals in the cave, and it really shows you how large that cave shelter of Shanidar is. It is not the only one in this area. In fact, there are lots of them. In fact, in our talk, we'll talk about a couple of them, but this is the one we're going to focus on at first. Shanidar Cave was very, very surprising for a couple of reasons. Shanidar 4, which was the fourth Neanderthal body that we found buried in the Shanidar Cave, and I say buried. Shanidar 4 was exciting because it was surrounded by something that anatomically modern humans use to surround burials all the time. Flowers, wildflowers. So much so, they found so much pollen of wildflowers inside a cave, it virtually shut up all the critics, and they said, you know what? This was an intentional burial, which opens up a huge can of worms if we start thinking about what that means. Why take the time and effort to bury a human body? It's hard work. It's a lot of work. It's also dangerous because why would you bury a body where you live, where a scavenger who could be very dangerous? We're talking cave bear, hyena, those types of animals that can absolutely kill humans. That's weird. That's a very modern human thing to do. We bury human beings in a place that is accessible so we can get to their graves. We call them graveyards now, but they're in the vicinity of where we live. In fact, up until really the Civil War in the United States, we tended to bury people on our own land. We would bury them in the back nine over by the, third field over or whatever, so that we can visit our loved ones. Were the Neanderthal doing that? Were the Neanderthal burying these individuals because they were special, individual, important to them? Could any of this actually be associated with ideas of an afterlife and religion? Man, that is some crazy stuff. We can't prove anything beyond the fact that they were obviously intentionally burying these bodies. Shanidar 1. This is the first one that they discovered. He wasn't covered with as many flowers or anything, although later they did go in and find some pollens. But what was significant about a Shanidar 1 were myriad. We find a lot of things that are really important about this individual. First thing is, he's buried intentionally. Second thing is, who is he? Well, he's an old man, which is remarkable in and of itself. The estimates vary. He's somewhere between 45 and 60 years old, which is extremely old at that time. In fact, anatomically modern humans at that time were generally only living to about 30 to 40 years old. So to find somebody who's 40 to 60 years old is really remarkable. Beyond that, keep in mind that up until the Industrial Revolution, if you look at the population in London, for example, the largest metropolitan city at the time, during the Industrial Revolution, the average age of a Victorian English person, especially if you were poor, was somewhere around 23 to 30. Average age. Most people were dying in infancy. It's crazy. This is the Teshi-Tosh child burial. Again, this shows us quite clearly, this is not an accidental, this isn't like a cave-in or something like that. You can see this child was basically ensconced in ibex horns. This was very intentional. This is somebody they care about. This is a child which they're putting all of this effort into the burial, which is quite obviously intentional. Here's Shanidar 1. Here's his head, his face, his skull. What are we looking at? Well, if you'll notice, over here on his right-hand side, do you see this abnormality here in his eyebrow area, in his brow ridge? That is a healed fracture. Furthermore, if you look within the eye socket, in here, do you see how these two bones have crossed over each other? That would cause a severing of the optic nerve. So what has happened, this individual had his head crushed. So much so it actually caused blindness in one eye. Think about this for just a minute. Now we've got an old individual with one eye. Is that going to be very useful for hunting, even gathering, if he can't tell his depth perception? Why keep this individual around? He's not going to be a great hunter. He's not bringing a lot to the table as far as being a Neanderthal living off the land. What's going on? Why did they bury this individual? Furthermore, how did he live that long? This is probably the most striking part of Shanidar 1. Shanidar 1's left arm, healthy, good, nice left arm. You can see these are his humeri. Here's his left humerus. Big, burly, strong, powerful. There's a huge, this is the pass-through area for the biceps ligament. Can you see how deep that fissure is? Look at these massive attachment points for the muscles in his forearm. He is a big, strong individual. Now look at his right arm. First of all, you'll notice the end is missing. The elbow side of it, totally gone. You'll also see there's quite a lot of trauma above that. This looks like what we would call an accidental amputation. That is, he lost the entire lower part of his arm. And it happened fairly early in life, because if you look at the rest of the shaft of that bone, it looks like a raisin. It looks like it's just shriveled up. And it is. It's because that arm isn't being used for a long period of time. The bone starts to resorb. It starts to break down a little bit because he's not using it. So the body uses those materials for other things. You'll also notice that at the upper end of the shaft, there's virtually nothing as far as muscle attachment. None of that biceps groove, gone, barely there. because there's virtually nothing going on that side. He lost the lower part of his arm early on in life. So now think about the ramifications here. You've got a hunting-gathering society living off the land, and now you've got a guy with one eye and one arm. Is he going to be a great hunter? Hell no. Is he going to be really brilliant at anything physical? No. He's like the boat anchor. Why did this guy live to that old? But it gets worse. Here's Shanidar's feet. Now, to be honest, it looks horrible on the left side here. You look at this left foot. This is the left foot. Simply, we're just missing these pieces. They weren't ripped off or anything. Moreover, look at his left foot. It's actually fairly healthy. But look here on his right foot. Again, on the right side. We have lipping down here. And do you see this, how the end of where his toe would attach right here? It looks like it's a melting ice cream cone. Do you see all this extra bone growth? And we see more over here. And look at this, a healed fracture over here on the pinky toe side of his foot. What happened? Well, all of this melted ice cream look is osteoarthritis. And it goes on down here on the talus bone. You see these outgrowths, these bony outgrowths. This is arthritis. What's going on? This guy now has such an arthritic right foot, he can probably barely walk on it without a lot of pain. What gives? We got a one-armed, one-eyed, limping guy living in a society that is living off the land. They're moving around constantly. They're having difficulty always getting food and enough of anything. And here's this guy. Is he useful in that society? Maybe. But his usefulness may be a surprise. It's difficult for people today to think about this, but the value of older people. What is the value of our elderly? Well, if we're quite honest, they're kind of losing their value in today's society because we all have Google. Before that, we had libraries, the written word. Back in the day, old people were the tome of information. If you wanted to know something, if you wanted to learn something, if you wanted to understand something, you would ask Grandma. Hey, Grandpa, how do you change a tire? Right? Well, that's probably what Shanidar 1's value in his group was. He was wise, the wisdom that comes with old age. He was a valued member for one reason or another. That we know because they were helping him along for a very long time. This is not unique amongst Neanderthals. We'll see some more later on. But I'd like you to think about what all of this means. If we put together that Shanidar 1, Shanidar 2, 3, and 4 were all buried intentionally. The Amud bodies were buried intentionally. We haven't met them yet, but La Chapelle-aux-Saints was buried intentionally. All these intentional burials of individuals around the world, well, around the Neanderthal world. What's going on? All the ramifications of this are pretty deep. And we'll talk about what their society was doing in a minute. The last thing is Shanidar 1's teeth. Look at these teeth. First of all, you'll notice the red staining. That is most likely red ochre. We'll talk about the aspect of that in a minute. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the anterior teeth. If you guys can see, his nose is pointing this direction over here. These are his front teeth. See this angle at which they're worn? That's abnormal. This wear is fairly normal. But this is weird. And I'll tell you, a lot of different theories popped up about this. Theories that, quite frankly, missed the point. Theories ranged from such ideas as, oh, they're cracking stone with their teeth. That is nonsense. We now know, everybody knows, that you flint knap with either antler or another stone. depending on what you're trying to do. Nobody uses their teeth. It just doesn't make any sense. So why would Shanidar 1, our one-armed, one-eyed, one-footed guy, have worn down anterior teeth? The truth is pretty straightforward. And the fact that scientists missed it for a while is frankly embarrassing. What do you do when you have one arm, one hand? When you can't use one of your hands, you tend to use your teeth as another hand. We call this scientifically paramasticatory. That means you're using your teeth for something other than chewing. Mastication means chewing. So paramasticatory means using it for something other than chewing. That is using your teeth as a hand to grab onto something. Think about if you have to pull on a shirt and for whatever reason you might have hurt your hand. So you don't want to use your hand. You grab it with your teeth. Tying a shoelace, you pull it with your teeth if you only have one hand. This guy was probably using his mouth as an extra hand because he was missing a hand. It makes a lot more sense. And it's kind of a facepalm kind of moment in science. Finally, here we have La Chapelle-aux-Saints. Now, if you listen to the name, La Chapelle-aux-Saints, this is a long way away from the Levant region. Now we're looking at France. La Chapelle-aux-Saints, literally this one's known as the old man of La Chapelle, meaning he's old. Couple other things that are similar to Shanidar 1 with La Chapelle-aux-Saints. If you look at La Chapelle-aux-Saints' teeth, first of all, here's his canine teeth. These are the only two teeth that actually occlude, meaning they come together. When you gnash your teeth or chew on something, you put one tooth and push it into the other. He's only got two that do that, and they're his canine teeth. If you look directly behind that, in this whole area, look at all these teeth are gone. They've been gone a long time. In fact, all of this bone has since resorbed because it's not being used, just like Shanidar 1's arm. So it goes away. And you can see up here, he had some of his front teeth still intact on the upper side, but nothing on the lower side to chew against. Therefore, La Chapelle-aux-Saints probably could not chew for himself, meaning the rest of the tribe was likely chewing for him. And again, as you probably gleaned from his name, he's old. He's right up there with Shanidar 1 in that he's probably 50, 60, somewhere in that range of age, which is very old for a Neanderthal especially, or anybody living at this time in the late Pleistocene. Well, mid-Pleistocene for this guy. So what's going on? Well, just like Teshiktosh, just like Shanidar 1 through 4, we're seeing an intentional burial of an individual whom they took care of. That's interesting because this is a far cry from that animalistic, hair, fur-covered, club-wielding thing that we saw in the very beginning when talking about Neanderthals. Now we're talking about individuals who care for each other into old age. Why into old age? Probably because these guys had wisdom and could teach and tell and explain things. I always joke that Shanidar 1 can tell you how not to lose an arm, an eye, and a foot. And La Chapelle-aux-Saints, he might have been a dentist. He was like, oh, now you kids take care of your teeth. You don't want to look like me. I don't know. I'm making all this up. But the point is, they were definitely taking care of these individuals. They cared about them after they died. And they put them into a grave in an area where they're living, which is a dangerous thing to do because it could attract scavengers that can be very, very dangerous. Which brings us to another idea about Neanderthals in general. This is really interesting. Neanderthals, if we take them as a whole, the whole group of them, almost 90% of Neanderthals that make it into adulthood, this is like late teens, early 20s, have a lot of healed fractures, a lot of injuries. The injuries are primarily to their legs, hands, arms, feet, ribs, and in some cases heads. What the hell? What gives? Well, they're doing something specific. They're doing something different than what most anatomically modern humans were doing, partially driven by where they're living. Neanderthals are living in a very cold weather environment. Is that good for farming? No. What's it good for? What lives in that cold weather area with them? Big animals. So they are hunting. Remember, these guys have huge muscles, and they've got to feed those muscles a lot of protein, a very high protein diet. Some we now know were exploiting marine resources, but most were exploiting land resources like woolly mammoths, woolly rhino, the very large elk, ibex, things like that. These large animals that live in those areas. And they're dangerous animals. So, not surprising, Neanderthals have a very typical pattern of injury, pattern of fractures that we see amongst a certain group of anatomically modern humans doing a very similar thing. And no, I'm not talking about hunting. Because with hunting, the way we do it, we cheat. We use guns, we use all kinds of long distance stuff, at best a bow and arrow or maybe a slingshot. These guys were using spears. So what do you have to do to kill a woolly mammoth with a stick with a rock tied to the end of it? You've got to get up close and personal with a big animal that doesn't want you there. Very similar fracture pattern that we see with anatomically modern rodeo riders. Shouldn't be surprising. They're up close and personal with an animal that, quite frankly, doesn't care about the rider. What this bull is caring about is the rope that's tied around his testicles. You can see it in the background there. That is what he's trying to get off. So yeah, they buck and do everything they can. This guy just happens to be sitting on top, so he's just going along for the ride. But what do we see? Well, not surprisingly, in modern rodeo riders, we see a lot of broken arms, broken ribs, broken legs, ankles, and their heads. In fact, nowadays, some places, they'll actually wear helmets underneath their cowboy hats because they're up close and personal with a very large animal. But I'm here to tell you, a bull is nowhere near as large as a Pleistocene woolly mammoth. They were called mammoth for a reason. I think a mammoth would be about maybe 6 to 10 times larger than a big modern bull. Next, we look at their tools. The Neanderthal toolkit, which is named the Mousterian toolkit, and we see a lot of surprising things that breaks with this idea that they're this big, brutish idiot. Instead, we start to see some very interesting things here. First of all, you can see these stone tools are very high tech, dare I say it. These are hard to do. Getting a meaningful flake, a meaningful blade to break off from a piece of stone. But then look at what else we have here. We've got bone and antler being made into these. Any idea what these might be? They're needles used for sewing skins together or making things like a tent or something like that out of an animal skin, likely. Then up here at the very top, we've got some other very interesting things. You guys will see a lot of teeth, a couple claws, a couple seashells, but something very interesting is the other end of these things. In fact, I suspect these are human deciduous teeth, meaning baby teeth. So now we've got something interesting. What is going on with these things? You can see there's an interesting little cord marks carved into around the tops of these. And on a couple of them, you'll see holes drilled through them. How in the hell are they drilling holes? Do they have a Ryobi cordless? Of course not. Instead, if you look down at numbers 23 and 22, these are stone drills. Think about holding this and turning this end. into something that's softer than the stone, like, I don't know, a tooth or a claw. And it's going to bore its way through and make a really nice round hole through which you can pass a leather thong, which they were also making, and make a necklace. So now we've gone from these hairy brutes holding a club to jewelry wearing, caring, nursing individuals who are burying each other and learning from each other. And there's a lot more that they're doing. In fact, these baby teeth, this might be a mom who's like, oh, I'm going to keep your teeth. How many of us have gone through mom's closet or drawer or something when we're adults and we found all of our baby teeth that mom kept? Weird, right? But these are things that parents do. So this is a very human thing. Neanderthals were similar, if not just like us. They're just built for cold weather. Next time, we're going to talk a lot more about some of the weird things that we don't traditionally attribute to these big, heavily built Neanderthals.